Hello everyone, Simon here. Welcome back to Learning Neurology and Psychology with Google Gemini 3. This one, let's talk about dementia, Alzheimer's, and other, I guess, age-related brain issues, right? Let's move on to age-related problems with the brain. Uh, Starting with dementia. What exactly is dementia? Um, is it just the brain growing old and therefore inevitable? Um, what happens to the brain, and are there possible treatments to delay or reverse it? To understand dementia, we have to change how we look at our three-story house. Up until now, we have talked about glitches in the wiring or faulty filters, right? So like your brain not working properly. Dementia is different. It is the physical collapse of the house itself. Dementia is not a single disease. It is an umbrella term for a set of symptoms, memory loss, personality changes, confusion, caused by the death of brain cells. Terrifying. Your brain cells start dying, and your brain starts doing weird things. Is it just growing old? Normal versus pathological? It is a common myth that dementia is inevitable. Oh, it's a myth. While the brain does change with age, normal aging and dementia are biologically distinct. Mm. In normal aging, the prefrontal cortex might get a bit slower. You might forget where you put your keys, a retrieval error, but you eventually remember. Right? It slows down, but it still works. The cables in the house are slightly frayed, but the structure is sound. In dementia, you forgot what the keys are for, a processing error. You don't know what keys are for? So you look at the keys and you don't know what they are. This is pathological. It is caused by specific diseases that actively destroy the drywall and foundation of the brain. It is no more normal than a heart attack is a normal part of aging. But heart attacks happen to a lot of people. It happens a lot. So how is that not normal? What happens inside? The gunk and the tangles. In Alzheimer's disease, the most common form of dementia, two specific trash products build up and kill neurons. Amyloid plaque, the trash in the hallways. Imagine a protein called beta amyloid as sticky trash. In a healthy brain, the custodians, glia cells, sweep it away. In Alzheimer's, the trash piles up outside the neurons, blocking communication between the rooms. So this is like a buildup of plaque inside your brain, and it blocks the signals, right? Tau tangles, the collapse of the rooms. Inside each neuron are tracks that transport nutrients. A protein called tau acts like the railroad ties holding the tracks together. In dementia, the tau collapses into tangles, the tracks fall apart, and the neuron starves to death from the inside out. Terrifying. Right, so the tracks inside the neurons that transport nutrients inside collapse. And so the neurons die. So Alzheimer's disease, this is the brain with Alzheimer's. You see the giant holes? Basically, your neurons are dying, and they're leaving giant gaps in your brain. The bottom-up collapse. Dementia usually destroys the house in a specific order, which explains why the symptoms appear the way they do. Right? The filing cabinet, the hippocampus, this is the memory. This is usually the first to go. This is why the person can't remember what happened 10 minutes ago. but can vividly describe a wedding from 50 years ago. The new memory files are being shredded as soon as they arrive. So the hippocampus is damaged, and so they are no longer able to form new memories. Right, so that's like memory loss is usually the first symptom. And in the prefrontal cortex, as the damage moves to the front of the brain, the CEO loses control. The person becomes impulsive, struggles with choices, and may lose their social filter, similar to Phineas Gage. Yeah, so old people get angry, like the angry old man trope. It's not just a trope, it's their dementia. As the brain, like as the prefrontal cortex loses neurons, they become less able to control themselves, and so they just act out whatever it is they feel. So they become impulsive. So the angry old man is the next part. Like first the forgetful old man, right? And then the angry old man, or woman. It's the same applies to women as well. And in the basement, the limbic and brainstem. Eventually, the damage reaches the areas that control emotion and basic bodily functions like swallowing or walking. Right? Eventually, they just become numb, and then they just die. They are unable to do anything anymore. They can't walk. They can't eat. Hmm. Can we delay or reverse it? Currently, there is no cure to reverse the death of neurons once they are gone. However, we have ways to shore up the walls. So this is important. A lot of the time, people just see this happening and they accept it. They don't do anything about it. And in fact, old people often resist doing anything about it for some reason. I'm not too sure why. But actually, there are ways to hold it or to hold it back. Like if you go to a doctor, there are medications, right? So cholinesterase, cholinesterase cholinesterase inhibitors. These drugs act like a battery boost for the remaining neurons. They increase acetylcholine, a neurotransmitter vital for memory. It doesn't stop the fire, but it makes the remaining lights shine brighter for a while. But your neurons are still dying. Monoclonal antibodies, the new guard. Newer drugs like lecanemab are designed to act as molecular vacuum cleaners that go into the brain and pull out the amyloid trash before it can kill the cells. These can slow down the decline if caught very early. So this is important. You have to catch it very early. So this is like, when you start getting symptoms of your memory slowing down, you really should start doing this right away. But these are new drugs. I don't know if they're approved yet. So there might not be government funding wherever it is you live. There might not be government funding for stuff like this yet, but you have to catch very early. Yeah, so you have to like not pretend you're okay. A lot of old people, it's obvious they're declining, but they keep trying to pretend they're okay, and they refuse to see a doctor. The cognitive reserve, this is the most fascinating treatment. People who have spent their lives learning languages, instruments, puzzles, have built extra cables in their house. When dementia starts destroying one cable, their brain simply uses a different one. They have the disease, but they don't show the symptoms for much longer. Hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh, in the late stages of dementia, the person often exhibits the exact same behaviors as Gage did. They become fitful, irreverent, and incapable of planning. Yeah, like you get angry old people becoming violent sometimes. Because the prefrontal cortex, the hardware for being a civilized person, has physically evaporated. Dementia proves Gage's lesson one last time. Alright, I want to ask more about this. I want to actually turn on. I don't know if we go to Pro or Thinking. I need I need it to search the internet, right? Tools? No. So let me switch to Pro, see if it allows me to do that. If I remember right, recent research has pinpointed the source of the amyloid plaques to certain oral bacteria, believe it or not, to certain oral bacteria, which suggests new avenues for prevention or treatment. So I don't know, I don't think this is part of the training data for Gemini. So Gemini doesn't know because it's too new, right? Can you find anything about this on the internet? I don't know if Pro will search for us. All right, let's see if the more thoughtful version of Gemini can respond to this. Incredible. It takes a lot longer though. The Pro version, it thinks a lot more, and it takes a lot longer to give you the answer. All right, good. Let me switch back. You are absolutely right. This is one of the most exciting shifts in Alzheimer's research in the last decade. It effectively changes the narrative from the brain is making trash plaques by mistake to the brain is making weapons to fight an invader. The specific bacterium you're thinking of is Porphyromonas gingivalis, P. gingivalis, the primary driver of chronic gum disease, periodontitis. Here's how this research changes our three-story house analogy and what it means for treatment. The infection hypothesis, it is not trash, it's a barricade. Like your gum disease is infecting your brain. Oh my god, that sounds terrifying. For years, we believed amyloid plaques were just metabolic waste clogging up the hallways, like a janitor who went on strike. The new research suggests that amyloid beta is actually an antimicrobial peptide, a chemical soldier. It's antimicrobial. The invasion P. gingivalis bacteria enter the bloodstream through bleeding gums, the basement entrance, and eventually cross the blood-brain barrier. The defense, the brain detects these bacteria and releases amyloid beta to encapsulate and neutralize them. The problem, the amyloid works too well. It traps the bacteria in a sticky net, the plaque, but this net eventually hardens and blocks the neurons from communicating, causing the collateral damage we call Alzheimer's. In short, the plaque isn't the arsonist, it's the firefighter's foam left behind after putting out a fire. Yeah, so like your gum disease is entering your bloodstream through your bleeding gums and then getting into your brain, somehow crossing the blood-brain barrier and infecting your brain? Oh my God. The smoking gun, ginger pains. Researchers didn't just find the bacteria, they found the knife it uses. P. gingivalis releases toxic enzymes called gingerpains to feed on human tissue. The evidence, studies examining the brains of deceased Alzheimer's patients found high levels of these gingerpains. Yet no, the bacteria is eating your brain. The correlation, the more ginger pain is found in the brain, the more tau tangles, the collapsed rooms were present. This suggests that bacteria aren't just there, they are actively destroying the structural integrity of the neurons. Oh my god, horrifying. Horrifying. New avenues for treatment and prevention. This discovery opens the door to treatments that don't just sweep up the trash, like current drugs, but actually stop the intruder. Right? The ginger pain inhibitors, the new drugs. Pharmaceutical companies are currently testing drugs designed to block these toxic enzymes. Like, we might be a few years away from having treatments for Alzheimer's. Can you believe it? The strategy, instead of trying to remove the amyloid, which might be protecting the brain, these drugs aim to disarm the bacteria so they can't feed or reproduce. The status, there have been clinical trials, such as the GAIN trial for a drug called tuzaginstat. While early results were mixed for general populations, they show promise in patients who had high bacterial loads. This is currently an active area of development. Right, so they haven't figured it out yet. But in patients who had high bacterial loads, this made a difference. So for general populations, it's not sure whether they're not sure whether it's actually making any difference. But for people who had high bacterial loads, it is making a difference. Right? Prevention, flossing as brain defense. This is the most immediate takeaway for your daily life. If the mouth is the main entry point for the invaders, then oral hygiene becomes brain hygiene. Treating gum disease. Aggressively treating periodontitis, deep cleaning, scaling, might lower the bacterial load in the bloodstream, giving the brain fewer invaders to fight. Yeah, gum disease. The protocol, the standard advice of brush and floss, is now being viewed by some neurologists as a preventative measure for dementia. If you stop the gums from bleeding, you close the door to the invaders. Yeah, don't let your gums bleed too much. Fascinating. Hmm. Alright, so what I want to do is ask about uh what are there other infections? Diseases? Like infections, right? Infections that can harm the brain. What are the most common ones? And what do they do to the brain? I've switched back to fast. I think, okay, this is pretty fast. Uh, an infection is like a biological break-in. The brain is normally protected by the blood-brain barrier, BBB, a high-security fence that keeps out toxins and germs. However, some pathogens have developed wirecutters to get through. So the blood-brain barrier, basically you have, like your bloodstream carries, oxygen and nutrients to your brain cells, but they have to get past the barrier. Uh, and usually nothing gets through except for the oxygen and the nutrients, but some pathogens can get through. When an infection hits the brain, it generally causes two types of damage. Direct damage, the germ eating or exploding brain cells, and collateral damage, the immune system's firefighters burning down the house to put out the fire, right? The most common invaders, viral encephalitis, the fire in the penthouse. Encephalitis is an infection of the brain tissue itself. The most common cause is the herpes simplex virus, HSV1, the same one that causes cold sores. The mechanism, the virus often travels up the trigeminal nerve, a back door from the face to the brain. Once inside, it has a strange preference for the temporal lobes, memory and emotion. Oh my god, so scary, you guys. It eats your brain. The result, it causes rapid swelling. Because the skull is a hard box, the swelling crushes the brain against the bone. Even if treated, it can leave the person with permanent amnesia or gauge-like personality shifts. Right, it causes swelling and then brain damage. The herpes virus can travel into the brain. Wow. Bacterial meningitis, the basement flood. Meningitis is an infection of the meninges, the protective wrapping around the brain and spinal cord. The mechanism, bacteria like Streptococcus pneumoniae enter the bloodstream and leak into the cerebrospinal fluid. The house is plumbing. So your brain and your spine, it sits in the fluid. Uh, so the bacteria enters there. The result, the fluid becomes thick and pus-like. This blocks the drainage of the brain, leading to hydrocephalus, water on the brain. It is a medical emergency because the pressure can shut down the basement, the brainstem, in hours. Right, so the fluid becomes thick, it increases pressure on your brain, and it squeezes your brain to death. Right? If the brainstem dies, you die, right? Toxoplasmosis, the parasitic squatter. This is a parasite, Toxoplasma gondii, often found in cat litter or undercooked meat. Don't undercook your meat, you guys. The mechanism, it enters the brain and forms tiny cysts inside the neurons. Terrifying. In a healthy person, the immune system handcuffs the parasite and it stays dormant. Result, if the immune system weakens, like in HIV and AIDS, the squatter wakes up and starts eating the surrounding brain tissue, creating abscesses, holes in the brain. Uh-huh. In a healthy person, the immune system forces the parasite to remain dormant. It doesn't kill it, it doesn't remove it, it just neutralizes it. So when your immune system is weakened for some reason, the uh, the parasite wakes up and starts eating your brain. Wow. How germs cross the high security fence, the brain-blood barrier. The blood-brain barrier is very good at stopping bacteria, but germs use three main heist strategies. The Trojan horse, the germ hides inside a white blood cell, a security guard. The brain lets the guard in, and the germ pops out once inside. It infects your white blood cells. The paracellular breach. The germ releases toxins that melt the glue, the tight junctions between the cells of the blood vessels, creating a gap it can squeeze through. Right? Literally punching holes in your blood vessels. The nerve highway. Some viruses, like rabies or herpes, don't use the blood at all. They hop onto a peripheral nerve, like your finger or your face, and walk up the wire into the brain. So usually they can't get into your nerves, but if you like have an injury, so like a rabies, for example, if you get bitten by a rabid dog, the rabies virus can get into your nerves through the cut. Like it cuts into your body, so they can access your nerves that way. And then they infect your nerves and then work their way into your brain. Rabies. Isn't rabies almost always lethal? It is. Rabies is almost always lethal. Chronic slow burn infections. Some infections don't cause a sudden fire, they cause a slow rot. Lyme disease. If left untreated, the Borrelia bacteria can enter the CNS, causing brain fog, memory loss, and a literal slowing of the prefrontal cortex's processing speed. Lyme disease. So it's a bacteria. HIV hand. Even with modern medicine, the HIV can cause HIV-associated neurocognitive disorder. The virus infects the custodian's microglia, causing them to release constant pro-inflammatory chemicals that slowly wear down the synapses in the penthouse. Mm. So Phineas Gage, he had a giant metal rod go through his head, and the wound also got infected. All right, let's read about this. We usually think of Phineas Gage's personality change as a result of the rod, so the metal rod going through his skull. But Gage also survived a massive post-accident infection. Yeah, his brain got infected. Before antibiotics, most people with his injury died of meningitis. So why didn't he? Gage's survival was a miracle of basement strength, but the infection likely caused further scarring, collateral damage in his frontal lobe. This reminds your students that a brain injury isn't just a hit, it's the aftermath. An infection can be just as destructive as a physical rod because it uses the brain's own immune system to cause the damage. Hmm, interesting. Well, let's do what Gemini suggests and look at how sleep and dreams work. Okay, tell me about sleep and dreams. Uh, I am aware. I am aware. Well, that so when you sleep, your your brain slows down. It doesn't stop, but it slows down, and it allows the brain to recover from cumulative damage. That the brain consolidates memories during streaming. What else happens to the brain when we sleep? While you sleep, the three-story house doesn't just shut down. Instead, the day staff, the conscious stolen action, goes home and the night shift moves in. This crew has two main jobs, structural maintenance and data management. If you don't let the night shift do their work, the house becomes a toxic, cluttered mess where the CEO, the prefrontal cortex, can no longer make decisions. Yeah, so you have to sleep. We have evolved to sleep every day, and if you don't sleep, the toxins build up, and you will eventually die. The glymphatic system, taking out the trash. This is perhaps the most important discovery in sleep science in the last decade. During the day, your neurons are busy eating and working, which creates metabolic waste, including the amyloid beta we discussed in the context of Alzheimer's. The shrinkage. When you enter deep sleep, your brain cells actually shrink by up to 60%. They get smaller. They get smaller because they're ejecting all the waste. The flush. This shrinkage creates space between the cells. The cerebrospinal fluid, CSF, then rushes through the brain like a high-pressure hose, washing away the toxic proteins and trash accumulated during the day. Right, so you're flushing your brain when you sleep. The risk, if you don't get enough deep sleep, the trash isn't fully cleared. This is why a single night of sleep deprivation leads to a measurable spike in amyloid beta in the brain. Yeah, so like you probably have experienced this. If you stay up all night, the next day your brain is slower because there's so much trash accumulated in your brain that you haven't cleared out that your brain has difficulty thinking, right? And so like after 2 or 3, like if you don't sleep for 3 days, that's kind of crazy. But you basically can't think anymore. Like you can't think about anything. Your brain just doesn't work because like there's so much stuff that needs to be cleared out before you clear enough space for the brain to work again. So yeah, like if you somehow don't sleep for 3 days, you become very stupid. It's basically what happens. You just can't think properly. Even like staying up one night, the next day you're not very effective. Memory consolidation, the save button. The brain doesn't have a hard drive that saves memories instantly. Instead, it uses a two-step process involving the hippocampus, the filing cabinet, and the cortex, the archive. The replay. During sleep, the hippocampus replays the events of the day at high speed. It whispers these patterns into the cortex. right? The long-term save. Over the course of the night, the memories are moved from the fragile temporary storage of the hippocampus to the permanent structural storage of the cortex. The delete function. Sleep is also when the brain decides what to forget. It prunes away weak, unimportant synaptic connections so the penthouse doesn't get cluttered with useless data, like what you ate for lunch 3 Tuesdays ago. But you can only do this when you sleep, right? Because your cortex is the brain that's processing all the sensory information. And so when you sleep, you shut off the sensory information input. And that gives you enough like free space for you to process memories. So if you're still like awake and looking at things and hearing things and thinking about things, like you don't have enough space to also consolidate memory. So when you sleep, you replay the stuff that happens during the day and you process them into long-term memory, right? And by the way, part of dreaming is this. Part of the dreaming is you replaying your memories. That's why you see visions, like you experience things when you dream. You are replaying memories. That's what dreams are. But it's not exact, right? Dreams are strange, as you know. But they're strange because they're replays, but they're not perfect replays. The stage breakdown. The night shift works in 90-minute cycles, moving through different floors of the house. You need to sleep at least 90 minutes for things to work. Right, so the light sleep, N1 and N2, the heart rate slows, the body temperature drops. Brain benefit transition and motor memory. Deep sleep, N3, the lymphatic flush happens, physical repair and growth hormone release. So this is where you repair the brain, flush out all the trash. REM sleep, vivid dreaming, brain activity spikes, emotional processing and creativity. Fascinating. Dreaming, the emotional thermostat. During rapid eye movement sleep, the brain is almost as active as it is when you're awake, but with two major differences. The body is paralyzed. The basement, the brainstem, sends a signal to paralyze your muscles so you don't act out your dreams. The stress chemical is off. This is the only time in your 24-hour cycle when norepinephrine, the stress chemical, is completely absent from the brain. But why do you still get nightmares? If there's no stress chemical in the brain, why do you get nightmares? And why do you wake up scared? Huh. The result. This allows the brain to process difficult or traumatic memories in a safe chemical environment. It's like overnight therapy. You replay the emotion of a situation, but without the fight or flight spike, allowing the CEO to eventually make peace with it. Okay, but how does it explain nightmares? I want to ask about that. Why dreams are weird. Disconnect the CEO. In REM sleep, the limbic system, the emotional center, is 30% more active than when you're awake. But the prefrontal cortex, the CEO logic center, is mostly offline. Yeah, so it's just your limbic system going out of control. Just going wild with the emotions. This is why dreams are emotionally intense and visually vivid, but lack logic, time consistency, or a sense of strangeness. Without the CEO there to say, wait, why am I riding a giant cat through a library? The brain just accepts the emotional narrative as reality. Right, so that's the brain when it's dreaming. It's processing your emotions when you sleep and the emotional memories. The Phineas Gage connection, sleep-deprived brain. Sleep-deprived brain. When you're severely sleep-deprived, your prefrontal cortex, the penthouse, is the first area to brown out. Yeah, so you just don't think straight. A sleep-deprived person behaves remarkably like Phineas Gage. They are impulsive, irritable, struggle to regulate emotions, and have poor judgment. This is because without sleep, the CEO loses its connection to the basement. The emotional alarms go off, and there's no one in the penthouse to shut them down. Gage's rod was physical. Sleep deprivation is a chemical rod that temporarily disconnects the same circuits. Yeah, don't try not to be sleep deprived. It makes you stupid, basically. Not sleeping makes you stupid because your brain is just too worn out. Summary of the night shift. Cleanliness, sleep washes the brain of Alzheimer's-linked toxins and other things. Intelligence, sleep moves data from temporary to permanent storage. Sanity, dreams strip the pain away from memory so you can face the next day. I think there's more to it than that, but okay, it's a summary. I want to ask, hmm, all right, if the stress chemical norepinephrine is absent during REM sleep and dreaming, what is going on? What happens with nightmares? What happens with nightmares? How is it that a person... Oh, I guess the norepinephrine is gone, but the cortisol is not. The cortisol is the body stress hormone, and the norepinephrine is the brain stress hormone. They're two different hormones. So the cortisol probably is still there. But let me just ask anyway. What happens with nightmares? How is it that... How does a person wake up terrified by a dream if there isn't the stress chemical? This is a brilliant catch. It seems like a logical paradox. How can the brain create a horror movie, a nightmare, if the fear chemical norepinephrine is turned off? The answer lies in the fact that REM sleep is not a perfect seal. Oh, is it? The nightmare is essentially a system failure where the night shift loses control of the house. Is that how it's, is that what's going on? Is that really what's going on? Can I get some references to back this up? I'm not sure I believe you. Nightmare in the Brain. Oh, maybe it is. Check it out. Emotional memory during processing during REM sleep with implications for post-traumatic stress disorder. Uh, Rhythmic interaction, especially in the theta band between the medial frontal prefrontal cortex and limbic structures, is thought to play an important role. Right, so your rhythmic interactions between your prefrontal cortex and your limbic structures. This is what you're dreaming. Lead to fear extinction during REM sleep. Blah 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 blah. Lower frequency 4 Hz theta inputs affected these changes over a wider area of input strengths. In contrast, inputs at other frequencies were ineffective at causing these synaptic changes and did not suppress fear memories. It has to be a very specific frequency. Under PTSD REM sleep conditions, rhythmic activity dissipated, and 4 Hz theta inputs to IL, what's IL? Infralimbic cortex were ineffective, but higher frequency 10 Hz theta inputs to infralimbic cortex induced changes similar to those seen with 4 Hz inputs under normal REM sleep conditions, resulting in the suppression of fear expression cells. These results suggest why PTSD patients may repeatedly experience the same emotionally charged dreams, and suggest potential neuromodulatory therapies for the amelioration of PTSD symptoms. So in a normal person, a 4 Hz theta frequency, your brain waves, uh, results in fear extinction. right? It suppresses the activity of fear expression cells for the associated memory. But with PTSD, 4 hertz doesn't work anymore, but 10 hertz work. Your brain, your brain has changed. PTSD has changed your brain so that normal dreaming does not reduce the fear. But if you like, if you, you know, if your brain waves move faster, 6 hertz faster, then it does work. So you have to change how, like, you have to change the frequency of your brain waves to make the PTSD go away. What? Amazing. Nightmares in the brain. So what is the reference here? Oh wait, let me just continue. The conflict, amygdala and versus the silent CEO during REM sleep, during rapid eye movement sleep. The limbic system, the basement alarm, is highly active. It can generate intense feelings of fear, dread, or being chased. Normally, because norepinephrine is absent, the brain processes these fears coldly or coolly, like a scientist looking at a specimen, but in a nightmare. Mm. So the limbic system can generate intense feelings of fear, dread, or being chased. But the brain processes the fears coolly. But in a nightmare, the amygdala becomes too hyperactive. It creates an emotional surge so powerful that it overrides the REM safety protocol. That's this reference. This surge is so intense that it forces the brain to panic restart. Oh, oh. Hey, that's interesting. Terror-filled sleep. Night terrors are not technically dreams, but instead sudden fearful reactions that occur during transitions from one sleep phase to another. So that's not actually nightmares. Trauma and nightmares. Nightmares can arise for a number of reasons. Stress, anxiety, irregular sleep, medications, mental health disorders, but also PTSD. Not only are nightmares more common for those with PTSD, they are more frequent, sometimes occurring several times a week. Post-traumatic nightmares often involve elements similar to the trauma itself, right? Okay, but what happens? Can be treated in a variety of ways. First, the cause of the stress, if there is one, must be determined. If a stressor is identified, effective ways to manage it should be found. Wait, that's it? I don't think this supports what Gemini is saying. I mean, there is night terrors. Let's see what Gemini says. I'm a little bit skeptical about this. The breakout and the adrenaline spike, you don't actually experience the high stress chemical while you are in the deep REM sleep state of the nightmare. Instead, the terror causes a sudden transition out of REM. Well, okay, I mean, that's kind of what this is saying. The threshold, once the fear in the dream hits a certain volume, it triggers the locus coeruleus, the source of the norepinephrine in the brainstem, to suddenly fire to wake you up. The transition, in a split second, you go from zero norepinephrine adrenaline to a massive flood of it. The result, you wake up with a racing heart, sweat, and gasping breath. The terror you feel upon waking is the body reacting to the chemicals that were just dumped into your system to force the emergency wake up. Okay, all right. No, I think this is right. So normally when you're dreaming, you don't feel fear. But when your dreaming becomes too intense, your body, because sometimes, I don't know if you've experienced this, but when something is happening in the real world, it can come into your dreams. Like when you hear, like when there are sounds, like imagine you're sleeping and you're dreaming, and there are sounds, like the sounds will become incorporated into your dreams because the sounds are coming in and they become part of the dream, right? And so, I don't know if you've had that happen, but I guess what's happening here is that at some point, your brain starts to worry that maybe the nightmare is actually the real world happening and you're detecting it in your brain, and so it just wakes you up. Like it thinks, well, maybe this is real. And so it dumps all the adrenaline and norepinephrine into your bloodstream to wake you up immediately. And that's the nightmare. That's you waking up, right? Nightmare disorder and the leaky valve. People with PTSD, in people with PTSD or chronic nightmares, the valve that shuts off norepinephrine during REM is leaky. So that's a different problem. Their brain doesn't successfully suppress the stress chemicals. Because norepinephrine is present during the dream, the brain cannot strip the emotion away from the memory. Instead of overnight therapy, the dream becomes a re-traumatization. This is why people with PTSD often fear going to sleep. Their night shift is actually making the clutter in the house worse. Yeah, okay. Alright. Yeah, so if the stress chemicals are in your brain when you have a nightmare, then it would make it worse. Right. Night terrors versus nightmares are different flaw. It's important to distinguish between a nightmare from a night terror, as they happen on different floors of the house. Nightmares, REM sleep. Night terrors, N3, deep slow wave sleep. The brain state is high activity. The prefrontal cortex is offline in nightmares. In night terrors, the brain is stuck between sleep and wake. The experience. In a nightmare, you remember a vivid story. In night terrors, no story, just a raw feeling of dying, crushing. So your brain is stuck, and then you have an emergency wake up, right? The body paralyzed until you wake up. In a night terror, the body is not paralyzed, may scream or thrash. The nightmares, the chemicals, norepinephrine spike at the end. So this is the emergency reset to wake you up. The night terrors, massive autonomic surge while still asleep. So this is you stuck between sleep and awake. So they're two different things, right? Hmm. Summary of the panic restart. REM. The brain tries to process fear without stress chemicals. The overload. The fear becomes too intense for the night shift to handle. Emergency. The locus coeruleus dumps norepinephrine to break the REM paralysis. Arousal. You wake up terrified, feeling the physical effects of the chemical restart. So the nightmare is not necessarily that the dream was scary, but that's how your body wakes up quickly from sleep is with the stress chemicals. And so you feel the effects of the stress chemicals. Fascinating. All right, what else should we ask? We went a long way today. We started with dementia, and then moved on to sleeping, and then moved on to dreaming, and then to nightmares. Is there anything else that is related that I would like to ask? Mm, you know what? Going back to dementia for a bit. You mentioned that Alzheimer, 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 nope. H-E-I-M-E-R. You mentioned that Alzheimer's is the most common form of dementia. Are there others? Are there other forms of um are there other what are some other forms? While Alzheimer's is the most famous resident of the collapsing house, there are several other types of dementia that destroy the structure in very different ways. If Alzheimer's is a trash buildup problem, these other forms are more like electrical fires or plumbing failures. Here are the most significant other forms of dementia. It's not just one thing, dementia. Dementia is a symptom. Vascular dementia, the clogged pipes. This is the second most common form. It isn't caused by protein buildup, but by a lack of blood flow. Oh, okay. Right, so not enough blood obviously causes your neurons to die. The mechanism, small strokes or mini strokes, TIAs, block the pipes that carry oxygen to the brain. When the pipe clogs, every room downstream from that pipe dies. Yeah, so strokes. The progression, unlike the slow, steady decline of Alzheimer's, vascular dementia often follows a stepwise decline. The person stays stable for a while, then suddenly drops a level after a small vascular event, then plateaus again. Right, you kind of like stroke, another stroke, and then it's another stroke, and then you just keep stepping down. The symptoms, because the damage depends on which pipes clogged, symptoms vary. If the prefrontal cortex pipes clog, you see judgment issues. If the basal ganglia pipes clog, you see balance or walking issues. Right, so the symptoms depend on which part of the brain is affected. One of my grandmothers had strokes, and she just got worse and worse. And this was back in the time when people just didn't know what's going on. The healthcare back then wasn't very good. Mm. Yeah, but it just kind of got worse and it got worse. Like they never fixed the problem, so she just kept getting more and more strokes until the whole brain died. Lewy body dementia, LBD, the glitchy software. This is the type of dementia that affected actor Robin Williams. It involved the buildup of alpha-synuclein proteins, the same ones found in Parkinson's. Oh, Parkinson's. We should ask about Parkinson's. Oh, what time is it? Oh, this is a long video. The mechanism, these Lewy bodies don't just kill cells, they interfere with dopamine and acetylcholine, the software the brain uses to communicate. The symptoms, LBD is famous for fluctuating cognition. 1 hour the person is perfectly lucid, the next hour they're completely confused. Right, so they are sometimes unable to communicate. The vivid hallucinations, because this hits the visual processing area early. People often see complex, vivid hallucinations, like children or animals in the room, that feel incredibly real. Wow. So like Peter Pan syndrome, right? You see, is it no, Peter, that's something else, my bad. Uh, like you're seeing fairies, or you're seeing things that aren't really there. No, Peter Pan syndrome is something else completely. I thought of something wrong. Frontotemporal dementia, the broken filter. This is the most terrifying forms for families because it targets the prefrontal cortex, the penthouse first, often in people as young as 40 or 50. Oh man. So they just go crazy, right? If your prefrontal cortex is gone, then you're just out of control. The mechanism, the frontal and temporal lobes physically atrophy, shrink, while the memory centers, hippocampus, remain healthy at first. The personality shift, this is the Phineas Gage of dementias because the CEO's office is destroyed first. The person loses their social filter. They might become suddenly rude, hypersexual, or lose all empathy, even though they still remember exactly what they did yesterday. Yeah, so if this happens, you should take them to see a brain doctor, right? Like sometimes people suddenly become hypersexual or suddenly become violent, and and when that happens, they should see a doctor. But often people don't do that. They just assume that they're an asshole. Like when somebody like behaves badly, they just assume they're an asshole. They don't realize they have a disease in the brain. Two types: behavioral affects personality and conduct. Primary progressive aphasia affects the ability to speak or understand words. The translator in the hallway fails. Parkinson's disease. Oh, I was gonna ask more about that. While Parkinson starts as a movement disorder in the basal ganglia, the basement, the protein damage can eventually spread upwards into the penthouse. The experience, it often looks like a mix of Lewy body symptoms and Alzheimer's, but it always starts with the physical tremors and shuffling gait first. Alright, let me, like, tell me more about Parkinson's. More about Parkinson's. Parkinson's disease. What causes it, and what does it do to the brain? In a three-story house, Parkinson's disease is a structural failure that begins in the basement, specifically in the engine room that controls smooth fluid movement. While we often think of it as a tremor, it is actually a profound energy and signaling crisis within the brain's motor circuits. The engine room, the substantia nigra. The root of Parkinson's lies in a tiny dark pigmented strip of tissue in the mid-brainstem called the substantia nigra, Latin for black substance. Substantia nigra. Where? Where is it? Nope. Where is it? A? I don't know what, what? What are we looking at? I don't see what's highlighted. Is it, is it that? Is it the yellow stuff in there? It's behind the other stuff though. It's inside. Hang on. Is it that? I can't. It's inside the. Is it that stuff in there? I don't know. I don't know what this is, where this is. Inside the mesencephalon. Yeah. Anyway, the dopamine factory. These neurons are responsible for producing dopamine, which in this part of the brain acts like a lubricant for your movement gears. The breakdown in Parkinson's, these neurons begin to die off prematurely. By the time a person shows a physical tremor, they have lost 60 to 80% of these dopamine-producing cells. Oh, that's way too late. They're gone. The rust. Without dopamine, the signals from the prefrontal cortex cannot get through the basal ganglia to the muscles. Movement becomes rusty, jerky, or stuck. Right, so you can no longer communicate. But like the signals from the prefrontal cortex can no longer get through the brainstem to the rest of the body. Or at least, not cleanly. And it's because the dopamine in this part of the brain is gone. The culprit, alpha-synuclein trash. Just as Alzheimer's has amyloid trash, Parkinson's has alpha-synuclein Lewy bodies. This protein misfolds and clumps together into toxic balls called Lewy bodies. It's a misfolded protein. The propagation, these clumps act like a fire that spreads from cell to cell. Interestingly, some research suggests that this fire might actually start in the gut, the stomach, and travel up the vagus nerve into the brain's basement before ever hitting the motor centers. I, so sometimes when the protein misfolds, it also causes other proteins to misfold. I think that's what's happening here. The four pillars of symptoms. Parkinson's is diagnosed based on four primary physical signs, all resulting from that lack of dopamine lubricant. Tremor, usually a pill-rolling tremor, as if rolling a small object between thumb and forefinger. That happens when the hand is at rest, so like this. Bradykinesia, slowness, or is it? It's this, right? Yeah. Slowness of movement. The CEO sends the command to walk, but the basement takes a long time to process the request. Right, so it takes a long time for them to start moving. Rigidity. Muscles become stiff and cogwheel-like, making it hard to swing the arms while walking. Postural instability. A loss of balance, leading to a shuffling gait, where the person takes small hurried steps to avoid falling. Yeah, but by the time you get to that point, the dopamine's already 60 to 80% gone. Treatments flooding the engine. Since the problem is a lack of dopamine, the most common treatment is to provide the brain with more fuel. L-dopa, levodopa. You cannot just swallow dopamine, it won't cross the blood-brain barrier. Instead, patients take L-dopa, which is a building block that the brain can convert into dopamine once it's inside the penthouse. Deep brain stimulation. If the gears are stuck, doctors can surgically implant an electrical pacemaker into the subthalamic nucleus. This electrode sends constant pulses that override the glitchy basement signals, often stopping tremors instantly. But does it help with the other problems, like not being able to move properly? Non-motor symptoms, the house collapses upwards. As the disease progresses, the alpha-synuclein fire can spread from the basement up to the penthouse. Loss of smell. Often the very first sign occurring years before a tremor. Loss of smell. Sleep disorders. People often act out their dreams, REM sleep behavior disorder, because the basement fails to paralyze the body during sleep. Right, that makes sense. Parkinson's dementia. If the Lewy bodies reach the cortex, the person develops memory and judgment issues, similar to other dementias we discussed. Right, so the dementia goes from the bottom up, but once it gets to the top, then you stop thinking. Okay, so let me end this here. We talked about brain diseases, dementia, sleep, dreaming, memory. Okay, so next time I want to talk about sexuality. Why? We want to talk about why are you gay? Why are you gay? We're gonna ask that question next time.